The government of California has stated that churches cannot have indoor worship services because they could become nothing but bastions of COVID-19. They could help spread coronavirus, and they want to curtail COVID-19. But for some reason, strip clubs can be opened. Strip clubs can be in business. Strip clubs can operate in California. There was a judge in California who ruled that strip clubs in San Diego can be open. They can remain operational. So going to a strip club, no threat with coronavirus whatsoever. No threat of spreading coronavirus if a bunch of people gather together in a strip joint. But for some reason, churches could become centers of outbreak for this pandemic. Well, the Supreme Court recently told the district judges in California to see the recent Supreme Court decision regarding Governor Cuomo versus the Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn. The New York government wanted to make sure that churches in Brooklyn remain very, very restricted. So a church that can hold up to 1,000 people would only be able to hold 10 to 25 people. I encourage you guys to read the statement from Justice Gorsuch and also Justice Kavanaugh. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh made it very clear that this was discrimination. Why? Well, if the government of New York states that an acupuncture center is an essential business, but a church is not essential, that is discrimination. And Gorsuch stated something very interesting. He said, well, in some parts of the country, they allow marijuana shops. In Colorado, marijuana shops are allowed to remain in operation. So smoking weed, that's essential for society. In the state of Nevada, they want to keep the casinos open. So casinos, gambling, slot machines, that's essential. But church, no. And what this really indicates, what this really reveals, is how a lot of these politicians see religion. A lot of these politicians see religion as not only non-essential, but as something that could be completely shut down, and they wouldn't really have any qualms with that. This is what's so dangerous. I understand curtailing the virus, and in the beginning of the COVID explosion, back in March and April, the higher court of the United States made it really clear that keeping establishments closed down is important and is necessary because we have to curtail the spread of the virus. But now we understand, wear the mask, keep social distance. And if hundreds of people can gather together in a grocery store, and this was one of the arguments in the Supreme Court decision with Cuomo versus the Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn, if hundreds of people can be inside of a grocery store and they're wearing masks, and that isn't a source of an outbreak of COVID, if hundreds of people can be in a grocery store shopping and we're not worried that that could spread COVID, then people can gather in a church. People can gather in a church. And grocery stores have not been the source of outbreaks. Grocery stores have not been the source of outbreaks. In New York City, they've had situations where, members of the Jewish Orthodox community they want to get together, and they get in these big crowds, and they have funerals, and then of course you've had situations where people have gathered together, and people have gathered together in the thousands, and the government of California said, well, yes, George Floyd was murdered by the police. Gather together in the tens of thousands and protest police brutality. That's okay. But, the church, that's bad. Strip clubs, that's okay. Casinos in Nevada, that's okay. Marijuana shops, that's okay. Acupuncture centers in New York City, that's essential. That's an essential business. But church, no, you can't have that. That's discrimination. And the Supreme Court made that very clear. So what this really reveals is that a lot of politicians in the United States are not even neutral when it comes to religion. They don't mind being discriminatory, and they see religion as not essential for society, which is what any anti-clerical person, which is really how any anti-clerical person sees religion. And again, I understand the importance of curtailing the virus, and I understand that in the beginning it was essential and it was necessary to close down a lot of establishments, churches included. But at the same time, we understand the importance of masks, and we understand, hey, we can go to a grocery store in the hundreds, we're all wearing masks, we're all pretty much okay. Churches can do the same thing. Churches can follow the same guidelines. And as long as churches are following the same guidelines and making sure that everyone who enters the church has a mask, and making sure that people aren't too close, making sure that every other bench or so is empty of people, so that, so as to prevent people from getting too close, just making sure, just doing the proper measures. Churches can do those things. And if churches can do those things, they can be operational, just like a casino can be operational. But you look at these videos of people gambling, and they're not following any guidelines. There are videos you can see on YouTube of people in casinos. They're not wearing masks. They don't give a crap. But that's essential, right? Because it's a huge industry in Nevada. So a lot of politicians are not only indifferent towards religion, but they don't mind being discriminatory against religion. And at the same time, this could set a very dangerous precedent, in that in the future, you could see more, or you could see some kind of imposition of despotic measures against houses of worship, specifically Christian churches. This is actually one of my problems with what France has been doing. And I know this is a little bit off the topic. Well, not really. It's off the topic of what's happening in the United States, but it connects within the same theme of things. This is one of my issues with what has been happening in France. Remember when France banned the hijab, and all the conservatives were saying, oh, this is great, France is doing the right thing. No. Because France, remember how France was founded. France was founded, the modern day Republic of France was founded on blood. And it was founded on the blood of martyrs. It was founded on slaughtering Christians. It was founded on extremely violent, sadistic, and satanic mob violence. There were cases of cannibalism, nuns were butchered, priests were butchered, women were actually raped, people were butchered by the tens of thousands. A great example of this was what happened in the Vendée region of France, which was a very poor but very pious and religious place, and people did not want to abide by the anti-Christian government and by the anti-Christian measures. Well, over 100,000 people in the Vendée were butchered because the Catholics were considered to be anti-Republican. Now, recently, the French government has been talking about shutting down dozens of mosques. Now, I understand the importance of curtailing and getting rid of Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism and extremism in your society. Yes, these things should be purged out. They should be, because you don't want terrorism in your society, like Islamic extremism, all these things, right? We don't want this in society. But at the same time, who is to say that one day the French government couldn't do the same thing against synagogues and churches? If you read about what the French government has said in regards to these mosques, the French government has said that these mosques are anti-Republican. Well, they were saying that about the Catholic churches in the French Revolution. So who's to say that the French government won't one day turn around and repeat history again? So when you have, and this ties into the whole situation with COVID and discrimination against churches. When you have a chaotic situation like a pandemic, or when you have a problem like Islamic terrorism, these problems need to be solved, but the solution that is involved could entail something that could be used in the future for destructive reasons. So, for example, churches are closed down because they want to curtail the spread of the virus. Okay, I can understand that. But yet you're opening up all these establishments, you're allowing strip clubs and acupuncture centers and marijuana shops to be open, but churches have to be closed. Oh, tens of thousands of people can gather together and protest police brutality. That's encouraged. Even though Fauci himself said that what was happening was actually dangerous in regards to these riots and these protests against the police. When you see that sort of thing, it's obvious that discrimination is being done. And who's to say that one day in the future, some government officials won't say, well, we closed churches in the past before, and that was during a pandemic, and that was during a really big problem that we needed to solve. Well, we're dealing with this other problem. It could be terrorism, it could be a war, it could be whatever. Who's to say that they won't do this sort of thing in the future with much more blatant anti-Christian sentiment? You can say the same thing about France. Well, we shut down mosques because of terrorism. Well, all of these Catholics are against the LGBT. They're discriminatory. We can't have this. It's anti-Republican. Shut the churches down. And if you're going to sit here and say, well, Ted, that's crazy, they would never do that. In December of 2019, none of us thought that we would be in the situation we're in right now. None of us thought that we would have to all wear masks when we go to the grocery store. None of us thought that we would go to the Costco and the food court is completely gone. None of us thought that that there would be waiting hours before going into a grocery store. No one thought that there would be a limit as to how many people could go into a grocery store. No one thought this stuff. Nobody. Well, now we're in it. No one thought that, well, the churches are going to be closed because of a pandemic. No one thought that. One thing that the COVID situation should teach us is that what we are used to, what we are comfortable with, could one day dissipate. And we could be in a very, very scary situation. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.